Once we went into space to be part of a race so that people could walk on the moon. Many years have gone by, but again we will fly and return to the sky sometime soon. Can the kids of the earth reach the heavens? Could they answer the biggest of questions? Could they fly through the sky as the stars go by and reach for new worlds as they beckon? Could they fly through the sky as the stars go by and reach for new worlds as they beckon?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jim, a space scientist and a musician. Welcome to Space Quest, where we will be using stories and songs to talk about space with some visitors from the future. Do you think kids can go into space? Someday, there could be a girl named Laura and a boy named Tommy with their own spaceships and robot companions who come back from the future to learn how space exploration began. I have a question for you. Do you think there's gravity in space? I'll let you think about that, and we'll get back to it at the end of the show. There might even be some clues along the way as we meet our time-traveling friends.
Hi, Dr. Jim. Good to see you again. And Tommy says, hi.
Hi, Piper. I know you're Tommy's friend, but you're also his companion as well. As a space explorer, isn't that right?
Yes. We met each other when I was the primary inspector of the Pipe Examiner robots, or Piper, in a rocket fuel factory on Mars when Tommy was a little boy. He programmed me to be his friend, and now we explore space together.
And I am Vista, Laura's friend from Venus.
Hello, Vista. Please tell our friends how you know Laura.
Laura's parents run an astronomy space station near the planet Venus. I am the visible and infrared starlight analyst, or Vista, and I became Laura's traveling companion in space.
Well, it's very nice to see such good friends of Tommy and Laura. Thank you for coming to visit me from the future.
Sure thing, Dr. Jim. Tommy and Laura sent us back in time so that we could ask you about the history of space exploration.
Okay, but exactly how did you manage to travel back in time?
Laura and Tommy worked together to build a special spaceship that can travel through time by briefly turning the whole ship into antimatter, which goes through time backwards. While they fly very close to the sun, they dropped us off as they went on further back into time to see the early history of space flight.
Ah, so that's the secret for traveling through time? Turning the whole spaceship into antimatter? That's amazing. But why did you come back to find me in particular?
We found your name on the Mars Curiosity rover and discovered that you were a space scientist who used music to teach kids about space exploration. Since you are also related to Dr. Hans von Bodenheimer, the director of the Mars Museum, he asked Tommy and Laura to send us back in time to find you and learn about early space history.
I see. Let's get started by talking about a very important event, the first moon landing. July the 20th, 2019, is the 50th anniversary of the first time people landed and walked on the moon. Back in 1969, NASA's Apollo 11 mission took 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, all the way to the moon. Neil and Buzz took a special lander down to the lunar surface, while Michael stayed in orbit to take care of their main spaceship so that later all 3 of them could return safely to the Earth. But how did they get there? Going to the moon wasn't easy, and it took years of work to build the rockets and the spaceships to reach the moon and to land on it.
How many years did it take, Dr. Jim?
It took about 10 years for NASA to get to the moon. First, there were robotic missions with chimpanzees. Then, Project Mercury capsules took 1 astronaut at a time up into orbit. After that, the Gemini program, which means the twins, took 2 astronauts at a time into space. Finally, Apollo carried the 3 astronauts all the way to the moon and back.
Did people send monkeys to the moon?
Well, Piper, NASA sent chimpanzees into Earth orbit very early in the space program, but they didn't go all the way to the moon. But NASA did send robots to the moon before they sent people there.
Robots? Really? What did the robots do on the moon?
Well, they took pictures, tested the moon's gravity, and landed on the lunar surface. A robot named Surveyor landed there first to see if the moon's surface was solid enough to support a landing craft. People thought there might be a deep layer of moon dust and that a landing craft might sink right into it. Fortunately, that didn't happen.
Cool.
Yes, it really was the robots that prepared the way for humans to explore the moon.
Fascinating, but there must have been people who dreamed of going into space long before then.
Yes, Vista, the history of space exploration goes back much further than Mercury and Gemini. We know that the ancient Chinese people used rockets in warfare probably a lot like the fireworks that we see today. It's likely that they were used to frighten their enemies with the noise and the smoke from the powder that they used for fuel. Much later, a Russian space scientist named Tsiolkovsky worked out the math that showed that it would be possible to build a rocket to leave the Earth's gravity. Before that, nobody knew. An American scientist named Dr. Robert Goddard used this information to design a rocket that was powered by gasoline, a liquid fuel. Later, other people, such as Dr. Wernher von Braun, built even larger liquid-fueled rockets that eventually took people to the moon. The hardest thing was to make the rockets reliable enough so that it would be safe to launch them with people on board.
Weren't the rockets safe?
Not at first, Piper, but the rockets got better over time. In order to get ready for a trip to the moon, people began going into orbit to see if it would be possible to live and work in space. It wasn't really known if a person could function in weightlessness for any length of time. Would astronauts be able to breathe and eat inside of a spaceship as they floated around? Would their vision be affected? Would it be possible to sleep safely? No one knew, so they began to test these ideas with short trips into space.
What did they learn from the tests? Were the early astronauts okay?
Yes, they were. NASA started with the Mercury program, which used a small space capsule to carry 1 astronaut at a time to the edge of space and then into orbit. During Project Mercury, we learned that people could function in weightlessness and do complicated tasks. This gave us the confidence to try other things in space.
How many astronauts started out in Project Mercury?
Well, originally there were 7 people chosen to be Mercury astronauts. They were very experienced test pilots who were used to taking big risks in high-performance jets, and they had the right stuff to go into space.
What do you mean by the right stuff, Dr. Jim?
It means that these people had the courage, the flight experience, and above all, the technical expertise to handle unexpected problems. Many times, things would go wrong with the early spacecraft, and the astronauts would have to think and react quickly and calmly. That is the right stuff.
What kind of unexpected problems did they have?
Well, one time, a rocket thruster got stuck and made a space capsule start to spin really fast. It was difficult for the astronauts to fix that because they were getting dizzy, but they handled it. Also, there were problems with the design of the escape doors on the capsules, and those had to be corrected as well. This was very important since the early capsules came down from orbit through the atmosphere to land in water, which was called a splashdown. Then they had to just float there on the ocean until other people came to recover them. The door had to work just right so the astronauts could get out while the capsule kept floating on the surface.
Fascinating. That sounds really complicated, but I'm glad they took their time to think of everything.
Yes, it took a lot of people a lot of time to get Mercury and Gemini working properly to get ready for Apollo. Would you like to hear a song about how Tommy and Laura go back in time to see the early history of spaceflight?
Yes, Dr. Jim.
Okay, this song is called The History of Space. Tommy and Laura had a brand new job to do, to learn about the history of space. Could they go back to see the early milestones of exploration by the human race? Spinning around the sun, they took a curving path that pulled them ever backward into time. After they found themselves in 1961, they saw the early spaceships start to fly. Going to see the past, they built a ship to fly through time, looking for things to get on camera, moments that will shine. Doing it for the Mars Museum, took them all around. When they got back, they brought the pictures of the things they found. Yuri Gagarin was the first to orbit Earth. Then Alan Shepard rose into the blue. Mercury capsules flew with people like John Glenn, and Gemini taught them how to rendezvous. People around the world were racing for the moon, but NASA led the way in '69. After Armstrong and Aldrin were the first to land, Apollo came in peace for all mankind. Going to see the past, they built a ship to fly through time, looking for things to get on camera, moments that will shine. Doing it for the Mars Museum, took them all around. When they got back, they brought the pictures of the things they found. If their ship got near the show, they could be a UFO. Laura saved all the images of ships and crews that she and Tommy gathered from the past, bringing them back to Mars for people there to see the history of space from first to last. After the Mars Museum had an open house, the history display was well received, sharing the truth of how it all began in space by showing the good work that the kids achieved. Going to see the past, they built a ship to fly through time, looking for things to get on camera, moments that will shine. Doing it for the Mars Museum, took them all around. When they got back, they brought the pictures of the things they found. When they got back, they brought the pictures of the things they found. Welcome back, and remember our space question for today. Is there gravity in space? Let's talk with Piper and Vista a bit more to see if we can find any clues.
What other things did people try to do in space at first? Did they look out at the stars?
Yes, the astronauts looked out at the stars to help them navigate through space. They used well-known stars and constellations to figure out which way to point their rockets to maneuver around the Earth and later to the Moon.
Yes, Dr. Jim, constellations are a fascinating human invention where people use their imaginations to create pictures in the sky by using the brightest stars they can see.
Yes, navigation is very tricky in space.
Fascinating what humans can do.
Yes, and the Russians had a very active space program as well, including the first woman to orbit the Earth, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963. After Mercury, NASA moved on to the Gemini program, which means the twins. And just like the twins, 2 astronauts could ride in the Gemini space capsules at the same time. This allowed one astronaut to stay on board and fly the spaceship, while the other could go outside and float in space with a spacesuit.
How interesting to be able to float in space while so many other things fall toward the Earth.
Learning how to work outside the ship was very important as people were getting ready to go to the Moon. It wasn't easy to design a spacesuit that could keep people safe and still be easy to use. This was very important because there is no air on the moon, so the astronauts would have to wear spacesuits out on the surface. A spacesuit is full of air under pressure, so the astronaut can breathe. But just like a balloon, the spacesuit wants to stretch out straight, which makes it hard to bend the arms, legs, and gloves.
Robots don't need air, so it's not a problem for us. We don't need food or water, either.
Yes, that's why people send out robots to explore space first. Before people went to the moon, robots were sent first with names like Ranger, Surveyor, and Lunar Orbiter. Ranger took pictures of the moon and crash-landed on the surface. Later, Surveyor made soft landings on the moon, and the astronauts were able to find them there later. The Lunar Orbiter circled around the moon, took pictures, and measured the moon's gravity so that the Apollo astronauts would know what to expect when they got there.
So the Earth has gravity and the moon has gravity, which should be a clue about whether there is gravity in space.
Yes, it is. Now, to do their jobs, all robots need power. Another thing that Mercury and Gemini proved was that batteries and fuel cells could be used to accomplish missions in space. Eventually, atomic batteries were designed for moon landings and were also used to power robots. What do you and Vista use for power in the future?
Sorry, Dr. Jim. We can't tell you too much about the future since we could accidentally change it.
Oh, I see. I need to be careful about asking you too much, although there are many things I'd like to know.
We need to calculate our answers very carefully as well, Dr. Jim. We need to be able to return to the future when Tommy and Laura are ready for us. Can you tell us more about how Gemini helped NASA go to the moon?
Okay. The Gemini programs practiced many things to help NASA get ready for the Apollo missions, but one of the most important ideas is called a rendezvous. Rendezvous is a French word, and in this case it means two spaceships come and meet each other to dock in orbit and then move together in orbit around the Earth or even the moon.
It must have been difficult to dock spaceships in orbit with the primitive computers that they had.
Yes, but they were very skilled pilots, and they accomplished their tasks with superb hand and eye coordination, sometimes without using computers at all.
Did they ever crash into each other?
Fortunately not, but spaceships in orbit around the Earth are moving very, very fast, so a rendezvous can be very tricky to do. The Gemini astronauts showed that it could be done by bringing two spaceships together and connecting them very carefully. Nobody knew ahead of time how well this would work, but they did it without too much trouble.
Why was it important for the early spaceships to learn how to rendezvous and dock together? Why didn't they just send one spaceship all the way to the moon and bring it back? That's how we like to do it.
That's interesting, Vista. It sounds like your spaceships of the future are very powerful. The reason people had to learn how to dock spaceships together in orbit is because they planned to leave some parts of them on the moon. You see, the less material that they needed to bring back to the Earth, the smaller the rocket could be. As it was, the Saturn V was the largest rocket ever built until this day, and that's because it had to carry so much into space. NASA had to be very clever to make the best use of it, so they did something called staging.
Oh yes, we have heard of staging. Was that a common thing in the early days?
Yes, because it helped to carry bigger payloads into space. Once the rocket has escaped from the Earth's gravity, it's much easier to move around. However, it costs a lot to build a big rocket, and people have started to figure out how to use the rocket parts so that they can be reused. Here's a model of the Saturn V rocket, and I can use it to show you how staging works. Here's the bottom part, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. As the rocket launched, each of these would be left behind as they ran out of fuel, so there was less weight at the top for that part to go to the moon.
So that's why there are still parts of spaceships on the moon, left over from the Apollo program. Tommy and Laura went to see them one time and explore the other parts of the moon while they were there.
That's right. Let's hear a song about Tommy and Laura as they go back to the moon to find the Apollo landing sites. The song is called To Follow Apollo, and my friend conductor Arthur will help to get us started with the rolling rocket. Are we ready to go?
Yes, Dr. Jim. All aboard the rolling rocket. It's time for another space adventure with Tommy and Laura. Here we go.
Long ago we flew the lunar missions to explore. Since that one small step we haven't been there anymore. Robots fly out to the moon and circle round and round. But kids could land their spaceships there and walk up on the ground. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. Tommy did a survey of the landing sites of old. Laura found some clues by reading stories that were told. They began to make a plan to visit landing sites and see the famous places all before the lunar night. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. Astronauts went to the moon and landed there 6 times. Every place was different, they found rocks of many kinds. There were 3 more missions planned, but never got to fly. So now the kids could finish what Apollo dared to try. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. They came in peace for all mankind and made their mark for kids to find. First they found 6 places where some history was made. Looking from a distance, they could see the way things stayed. Then they planted flags in 3 more places on the moon, and finished for Apollo what had ended far too soon. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew.
Do you remember the question we were going to think about? The question was, is there gravity in space? We heard a clue from Vista, who said that both the Earth and the Moon have gravity, so they are pulling on each other through space. If you think about it, the planets are moving around out in space, and they continue to keep turning around the Sun. So there must be gravity working on them no matter where they are out in space to keep turning. The reason it can be confusing is that when astronauts are in orbit in a spaceship, they appear to float around because they're actually falling in gravity at the same time as the spaceship around them. Being in an orbit is like falling forever, but you never quite reach the ground. The gravity is still there, but you just don't notice it as you fall around the planet. So the answer is yes, there is gravity in space. It affects everything in space, the stars, planets, asteroids, and gravity even bends light itself. Gravity is what actually defines our solar system, which is the whole group of objects that are in orbit around our sun. That means that you're part of the solar system too. I'd like to thank my good friends Piper, Vista, and conductor Arthur for joining me today on Space Quest. And you too. Remember, Keep your eye on the sky and keep thinking for yourself. I'm Dr. Jim, and I'll see you next time.